Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is finally here. And while I think it's one of the most visually stunning adaptations ever made, I couldn't help but notice how much was changed from the Homer's original. The real question is whether those changes make the story better or worse, so we're going to look right into that. One of the first things I noticed is that Nolan tells the story in a much more modern cinematic sense. Homer's poem spends a lot of time on speeches, dialogues and long descriptions. That works beautifully in literature, but I don't think it would have translated directly to film. Instead, Nolan focuses more on visual storytelling. I felt like there were entire sequences where little dialogue was even needed, because the visuals were doing majority of the work. Personally, I think that's one of the film's biggest strengths. Something else I noticed is how the story is structured.
Nice.
In Homer's original poem, Odysseus doesn't simply tell a story in chronological order. A large portion of the journey was revealed through flashbacks. After he reaches the Phaeacians, Nolan plays with the timeline in his own way, without getting into every scene.
Perfect.
The movie rearranges certain events to create more suspense and emotional impact. I actually like this choice because it keeps audiences engaged, even if you already read the original story. Not every character in a movie gets the same treatment as they did in a poem. Some relationships are expanded, while some were shortened.
Oh my god, my Shayla!
That's pretty common in movie adaptations, because you only have a few hours to tell an incredibly massive story. I found myself connected with certain characters more than I expected, because Nolan gives them additional emotional moments that aren't emphasized nearly as much in Homer's version. This might be the biggest difference. Homer certainly describes battles and monsters, but Nolan turned those moments into massive cinematic set pieces. The Cyclops encounter, the sea voyages, everything feels enormous. I honestly expected spectacle from Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, boy.
But I still wasn't prepared for how epic some of these sequences looked. If you watch this in IMAX, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. One thing I found interesting was how the gods were portrayed. In Homer's poem, the gods constantly interfere with human events. Poseidon creates obstacles, Zeus influences outcomes, the divine presence is everywhere. Nolan, on the other hand, approaches this differently. Rather than making the gods the focus of every scene, the movie often leaves more room for interpretation.
No.
Depending on how you view it, some moments can almost feel symbolic, rather than completely literal. I actually think this is a very smart decision, because it allows modern audiences to engage with the story in many different ways. Homer's Odyssey is about much more than adventure. It's about home, family, identity, temptation, and perseverance. Nolan did keep these ideas, but leans harder into the emotional side of Odysseus' journey. Throughout the entire movie, I felt like the emotional weight carried as much weight as the action. For me, that separates the Odyssey from just being another blockbuster. This is where some long-time mythology fans might have some mixed opinions. The original epic contains many small stories, side characters, and mythological details. Trying to include everything would have made the movie incredibly long, so Nolan trimmed certain parts while expanding others. Personally, I understand why. Movies have different pacing than ancient poetry. Even though few details are missing, I never felt completely lost while watching. This is probably the biggest questions people are asking. Is Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey faithful to Homer's original? I'd say yes and no. The movie absolutely captures the spirit of Odysseus' journey. The themes of perseverance, the longing for home, sacrifice, and survival, they are still there. But Nolan isn't trying to create a word-for-word adaptation. He's making a Christopher Nolan film, inspired by one of history's greatest stories. Whether that's a positive or a negative will probably depend on what you're looking for. If you wanted absolute historical and literary accuracy, you may be disappointed by some of the creative liberties. If you wanted a cinematic experience that captures the heart of the epic while telling it through Nolan's style, I think there's a lot to appreciate. At the end of the day, I think adapting the Odyssey was always going to be an impossible task. It's one of the most influential stories ever written, and no two readers imagine it exactly the same way. I didn't argue with every change Nolan made, but I understand why most of those decisions were necessary, especially when bringing a story this old to modern audiences. For me, that's what made the adaptation so interesting. Even when it differs from Homer's version, it creates conversations on why those changes were made and whether they improved the story. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? What do you think was the biggest change Christopher Nolan made to the Odyssey? Should he have changed the story, or should he have stayed closer to Homer's original? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll definitely see you in the next one.